In this video, I will provide a basic guide to quickly populating a dungeon for an OSR game. Whether you only have an hour of prep time or all the time in the world to prepare a dungeon, I hope these steps will be useful to create something engaging for your players. Now before we start, I'd like to mention that you can support this channel by picking up my module Slughouse from DriveThruRPG or by checking out my Patreon. Links for both are in the description. Now, this is the method that I use to come up with adventure sites quite quickly, and you can do this using only your favourite rulebook. I have a couple of other resources that I like to use as well, but they are not essential. The first thing you will need is a map. In another video, I can go into more detail about creating a map, but for this example, let's assume you already have your map and you're looking to populate the thing. I've generated a map from Donjon, which has loads of useful generators. I've also linked that in the description as well. Next, you need to know the party level the dungeon is appropriate for. Most old school systems use a dungeon level to signal the danger of that dungeon. However, it's not always clear which character level that is appropriate for, and it is different from system to system, especially at higher levels. In most cases, the dungeon level is not equal to the character level. On average, assume the following dungeon level is an appropriate challenge for the average party level. Dungeon level 1 for second level characters, dungeon level 2 for third level characters, dungeon level 3 for fifth level characters, and so on. Now you know what character level the dungeon is designed for, you can determine which monster encounters are most appropriate. The idea that OSR adventures do not have to be balanced is not quite correct. There is much more flexibility in the strength of encounters than in modern systems, but there is an expectation that a party can deal with most encounters. It is not assumed that every encounter results in combat. Some should be avoided or resolved in a non-combat fashion. Still, having a baseline expectation for what is appropriate is good. Assume that 1d6 creatures with hit dice equal to the party level, if the party is about 5 PCs, is generally appropriate. Now, let's consider what can be found in each room. Aside from monsters, dungeon rooms can contain traps and tricks, dynamic elements, or they can be empty. For every 10 rooms, you should roughly have the following distribution. Don't worry about being exact, these numbers are a guideline. Monsters can include combat encounters against creatures, against humans and humanoids, or even social encounters. It just means that there is some kind of entity in that room. This can be generated randomly from whichever rule system you are using. My dungeon has 19 rooms, so I will include 6 monsters. We'll generate those a little bit later. Tricks and traps are designed to perplex, impede, or damage the characters. These can be standard pit traps, arrow traps, and falling blocks, but they can include magical traps, poison traps, or anything you can imagine. A great resource to quickly generate traps is Delta's OED Trap Digest. That's linked in the description. Traps do not have to be lethal. Alarms and things which drain resources, such as extinguishing lights, are considered traps. As well as traps, you can include tricks. This includes illusions, magical transportation, riddles, sloping passages, mapping challenges, and puzzles. Tricks and traps are mainly designed to drain party resources, including hit points and most notably time. It's always a good decision to include a hint that a trap is present. That way the players will be able to make a decision between interacting with the trap and expending resources or leaving the area. The final type of room content is a dynamic element. This is quite a broad term for things which can change the dungeon or the characters in some way, and can often be beneficial. In this section I would include the classic magic fountain and statue, which can be a bane or a boon, NPCs such as a merchant, healer, or oracle, mutagenic elements which can change or transform the PCs, and things that trigger changes in the dungeon or open and close routes. For example, something that drains water from one part of the dungeon, opening that area up but flooding a different area. Then you have empty rooms. I've made a video about this before. Empty simply means that a significant element is not included, but empty rooms can still have something interesting in them. So, now that I know what types of things I need to have in my dungeon, I'm going to go ahead and populate my map. Let's assume that this dungeon is designed for level 3 characters, so I will use dungeon level 2 from the rules cyclopedia to generate monstrous inhabitants. Before you start rolling though, you should first choose at least one special monster that will be central to the dungeon, like a boss monster. This should be a higher difficulty than the other monsters in your dungeon, so I will choose a 5 hit dice Hellhound. The rest of the rooms can be determined by rolling randomly. So I have my Hellhound, 1 giant lizard, a giant spider, 6 zombies, 2 humans, and 9 orcs. In terms of placing the monsters, I'd advise putting the main monster some distance from the entrance, so that it is not discovered straight away. Room 2 is a good choice. Next, we will have 2 traps or tricks. I will generate 1 trap from the OED Trap Digest and get a compacting room. For the trick, I'm going to put in one of my favourites, a teleporter at the end of one of the corridors. Teleporters are always good fun for mappers. Finally, we need some dynamic elements. Let's have an NPC merchant and also a magic fountain. If a character drinks from this fountain, he turns into a mist that allows access into room 16, which would otherwise be completely locked off. Next, let's look at treasure. It is up to you how much treasure you want to hide inside the dungeon, but I have a general formula which I like to use. First, it's important to know how much experience is required for a single fighter to attain a level. I've shown the totals here for some common systems. We want enough gold in 10 rooms for a single character to advance 1 level. Therefore, in our 20-room dungeon for level 3 characters, we want to have about 8,000 gold pieces. This 8,000 gold pieces of treasure should be well hidden or guarded. I would advise that an additional 25%, or 2,000 gold pieces, of easy-to-find loose treasure can be included. This is a general guideline to follow, so modify as you see fit. For every 10 rooms, there should be around 2 rooms of hidden treasure. Therefore, we want 4 rooms of significant hidden treasure in our dungeon. You can divide the 8,000 gold pieces into 4 piles of 2,000, but I find it better to have varied treasure troves. I'm going to have 4 hoards of 800, 1,600, 2,400 and 3,200 gold pieces. Divide the treasure into coins, gems, jewellery, goods and so forth. I like to use Courtney Campbell's treasure generator, but I have an old version which is now incorporated into one of the latest DriveThruRPG releases. I've linked below, but I don't know exactly which book the treasure tables appear in. The treasure tables in Swords and Wizardry are quite good for generating various treasures of an appropriate value, including coins, gems, jewellery and magic items. After doing this, I have the following results. I will now place the biggest treasure in the Hellhound's room and randomly place the others. Notice that one of the treasure hoards belongs to the NPC merchant. This presents a choice to the players. How will they attain the treasure? Will they steal it or kill the NPC, or will they leave the treasure alone and thus forsake the experience points? Also notice that the hidden treasure doesn't need to be really difficult to find. It just requires the players to tell you where they are looking, and for the characters to expend up to 10 minutes of time. I've divided the remaining 2,000 gold pieces of loose treasure and placed those in the rooms as well. I would suggest that most of the loose treasure is more mundane stuff like furniture, equipment and trade goods, rather than piles of gold or gems. They should be things that don't look very valuable at first glance. Now, this might seem like a lot of treasure, but assume that not all of it will be discovered. That's all the gameplay elements completed. The final thing to do is to generate some objects in the room, or to determine the original use of the room. especially for those empty rooms. For this, I like to use the Pathfinder 1st Edition Dungeon Toolbox in the Game Mastery Guide. I roll for a type of dungeon room, for example a banquet hall, followed by a minor and major piece of dungeon furniture, in this case a lantern and a mirror. Then I either trash the room, a splintered table with broken chairs scattered around, on the wall is a shattered mirror, or I come up with some kind of connection between the items. A banquet room bathed in red light from lanterns hanging from the ceiling. The table is laid for a feast with platters of delicious food. On one wall is a mirror which reflects the room, but in that reflection the food is rotten, the chairs broken, and rats skitter across the table. You can also use the Tome of Adventure Design to generate other little ideas, and you may find that with just a few prompts you have created an interesting room which, while technically empty, will intrigue the players and they will want to explore it. With this method you should have the foundations of your adventure, and it shouldn't take too long to do once you get into the flow. At this stage you can start to make connections between the room contents and the monsters. Of course, if you already know the purpose of the dungeon, or you have come up with a theme before you have started, this can be much easier. I find that it is not necessary to come up with the reasoning behind everything beforehand. Oftentimes you can make connections during the design process or while you play. Sometimes the players themselves will start to suggest things which you can expand on. As a side note, I think it's always best to only describe what the characters see, not what the room originally was used for. For example, don't describe the room as a banquet hall. The players should determine that from the description of the large table and the chairs around. And with that, we have finished. It may seem like a lot of steps, but the treasure values and room content ratios should be used only as a guideline, and you should be flexible to create the dungeon that best suits you. The more you do this, the quicker it gets, and it's scalable for both dungeon size and character level. Of course, this is only one way of stocking your dungeon, and a method that I like to use. It's not the only way though, and I am sure that many DMs prefer to stock their dungeons with another method or by instinct. Let me know what method you use in stocking dungeons in the comments below. If you would like to support the channel, check out my DriveThru RPG page and my Patreon. And as always, thanks for watching.